Welcome in, everyone, to Beyond the Beat, the show that connects you with who matters most, the beat writers. I'm your host, Matt Olson, and today we are diving into the Los Angeles Rams with Kyren DaSilva of the Rams Wire. This episode is brought to you by Fast Draft, your go-to for the quickest, easiest fantasy game in existence. Cam, how's it going today, man?
Good, man. How about you?
Great. It's sunny out in Nashville. It's not 100 degrees anymore. I'm a very happy human being.
Yeah, I know this mild temperature. It's much better. I'm up in Connecticut, and it's nice. Mid 70s, high 70s. It's perfect.
Can't complain. I'm ready for fall. And fall brings football, right? Like, I think that's the bigger part of this. Got college going off, starting week one now, not week 0, which is always nice. But we're here to talk Rams. And I think we just dive right in with Matthew Stafford, who just, when I was going through this and I was like, picking topic or whatever you want to call it. And I'm like, Stafford is back. And I'm like, well, yeah, his back is back, hopefully. So it just kind of worked. So let's talk Matthew Stafford. What's the latest you're hearing on him? Obviously, we've seen him back in practice. What do we expect from him if play calling wise, how his season's going to start? And then God forbid, what happens to this offense if Jimmy G has to come in and run it? Cam, all you, brother.
Yeah, so he started practicing last week, I think it was last Monday, and he hasn't missed a day of practice since. So really encouraging there. He went 4 straight days last week, and then he's practiced every day since then. And by all accounts, he's looked really good, and Sean McVay's been really encouraged. And he said he can't see the future, but he doesn't really have any reason to believe that Stafford won't be ready for week 1. So as long as there's no big setback or issue with his back that pops up between now and September 7th, he should be fine. The question that a lot of people have, and myself included, is what happens when this guy gets hit, and what happens when he's in week 9 and his back's flaring up a little bit and he's not feeling as good as he did the week before. And back injuries are tricky, and I know I feel it sometimes, and I'm 32 or 33. So
sure,
you never know what happens with these back injuries. You could roll out of bed differently one time and tweak it. So that's a concern when you have a 37-year-old quarterback who's had back injuries before too. So the hope is that he'll be ready for week 1. That sounds kind of like the expectation. And then from there, it'll just be managing it week to week. And he might have a lighter workload some weeks if his back's not feeling good, and they'll go from there. But Jimmy G, I think, honestly, he's gotten kind of a bad rap for how things went with the Raiders, and he was called kind of like a system quarterback with the 49ers and Kyle Shanahan. And I mean, the Rams run a similar system where it's very quarterback friendly, and these receivers get open pretty easily with these route combinations. But I think he's a perfect backup quarterback for them to have. He's not going to push the ball down the field like Stafford does, but he can get the ball into his guys' hands, and he might get Davante Adams hit a little bit more than he wants to, but he's a capable backup. And I think there's still a pretty big drop off from Stafford to Garoppolo, and then even bigger from Garoppolo to Stetson Bennett should he ever have to play. But it's a decent situation for the Rams to be in. And Jimmy looked pretty good in week 18 last year when they started him and Stafford was resting.
Yeah, it seems like he grasped the offense to your point. I mean, if you had to kind of dive into it and just say, like, do you really feel like numbers wise for the people, skill players around him, that there really wouldn't be that much of a drop off if they did go from Stafford to Jimmy G? Like, how do you think that actually impacts the skill players?
I think it would a little bit, and I think it might hurt Kyren Williams just because the offense will be a little bit more condensed and things won't be open as much. It'll probably hurt Tutu Atwell, assuming he's their number 3, because they're not going to be pushing the ball downfield as much probably with Jimmy compared to Stafford. But I mean, Puka wins on so many short and intermediate routes anyway, where those are throws that Jimmy can make. And I think it might hurt Davante a little bit just because he's more of a one-on-one guy who can win outside as that X receiver. So I think it would hurt him a little bit more, but I wouldn't expect like a huge drop off in terms of production for those skill guys.
No, that's great to hear. And I feel like, every time a backup QB comes in, everyone's just like, oh, the team's over, shut it down, especially from a fantasy standpoint, right? You're like, I got to move these guys, got to get off them. So that's interesting to hear. And, you alluded to Kyren there. talked about how it might impact him. And let's just dive into these running backs because I think it is pretty interesting, right? You got Kyren returning, signed his deal. That was obviously kind of up in the air for a little bit there. Last year they bring in Blake Corum, who I think people were initially excited about. Obviously didn't do too much his rookie year. And then they go out this year and get Jarquez Hunter, who is probably the most explosive back on this team now. So what can we expect from Kyren this year? We've seen mumblings about, his workload, or maybe not mumblings, maybe statements at this point about scaling his workload a little. And then how does that in or tie in Blake Corum and then Jarquez Hunter? I know you literally just saw it right before this. You put out an article relating exactly to this. So I'm guessing it's fresh in your mind, but let's start with Kyren and then get into the other guys.
Yeah, I'm pretty high on Kyren. I know some people are down on him a little bit coming off a 300 carry season, but I still think there's just no question whatsoever about him being the starter and the goal line back, and he's going to get those touches in the red area where they matter. But it's funny because Mike LaFleur said yesterday how they want to cut back on his carries a little bit and keep everyone fresh, and that's something that we've heard for 2 years with Kyren, and we heard it with Todd Gurley before that, and it just never seems to be a true split workload for a Sean McVay offense. He likes to have his workhorse backs, and I think we'll have that again with Kyren. But Blake Corum is a promising player. He looked really good in the preseason from what I saw, and in the clips from training camp and practice that I've seen, he's looked a little bit more explosive and a little bit more juice to his runs. But like you mentioned, Hunter is the most explosive guy in that backfield, and I think he might be hard to keep off of the field just because of how much he can produce on limited carries, where he can break off a long run and take a screen pass and pick up some big yards. So that's something that was missing from the offense last year. I think Kyren only had a handful of runs that were over 15 yards, and that's on 300 carries. So his explosive run rate was just not very good and didn't pick up these big chunks of yards. And the offense as a whole was kind of like that. They didn't create many big plays through the air either, and they kind of had to sustain drives going down the field and being very methodical. But if they get a little bit more explosiveness out of that backfield, I think it'll bode really well for them. So I think we could see all three involved. McVay historically has really not given his rookie running backs much opportunity in the backfield. We saw that last year with Blake Corum. He barely played, and that's even including a blowout in week 2 where he had 8 carries, and so he didn't have a ton of opportunities behind Kyren. But I think they're saying it again. They want to keep him fresh, and maybe after paying him $33 million or whatever it was, they actually do want to take into account his future and really not wear him down.
No, that makes sense. I mean, I think the biggest thing, and you said it, is the receiving out of the backfield. I felt like there were games where it was just like I would watch the game cast and be like, catch Kyren Williams. And then, he just seemed heavily involved in certain times throughout the year. And I was curious if anyone else would take that role over. And, let's talk purely from a passing standpoint. Do you see that getting split up at all? Like, what are you seeing from Corum and Hunter in terms of their receiving ability? I think people would love to know a little bit about that.
Yeah, they both seem like decent receiving backs. I don't think either of them you would consider specialist receivers where they're going to come in on every third down and be that receiver out of the backfield. And especially with the way Kyren can block, the Rams are really confident in the way that he can protect Stafford on these blitz pickups and third down situations where it's an obvious passing play and they need someone to step in there and take a shot for Stafford and keep him upright. So I think that's part of a reason that these rookies and young running backs don't play right away, just because there needs to be so much trust with pass protection. But I don't see, they're kind of all interchangeable in that regard. No one really stands out as being like a pass catching specialist out of the backfield. So we could see all three get work in that regard.
No, that's interesting. And almost a perfect segue again into the wide receivers, right? You talked about it earlier, top of this depth chart, you got Puka Nacua, his new teammate, Davante Adams, and then Tutu Atwell, who I feel like has just been hanging around. So I'm very curious your take on him. But, how do you think Adams' arrival impacts Puka, if at all? And what do you kind of expect from them, combined? Are we going to see the same Puka we've seen? Is Adams going to take from him? Do they both get theirs? And then where does Atwell fix into this or fit into this top 3 wide receiver set?
Yeah, it's hard to know exactly how the targets are going to be divvied up between Davante and Puka, because even the last 2 years, we didn't see Puka and Cooper Kupp on the field together a ton. I mean, they were both dealing with injuries throughout the last 2 years, so we didn't see them on the field together a lot. But I mean, Davante is a different type of receiver compared to Kupp. He's like your outside receiver. He's going to win one-on-ones on the backside and be that X receiver for Stafford. Whereas Kupp was more of that move him around a little bit, play him in the slot, design routes for him to get open and play Puka off of that. But now they can move those guys around. Davante can play in the slot too. It's not that he can't line up inside. So they have a lot of flexibility between those two guys. And then Tutu is the really interesting one. I was super surprised that they gave him $10 million guaranteed for 1 year this offseason. I didn't see that contract coming. I thought the way they used him the last 4 years, he was gone and he was going to go play somewhere else. And then that contract drops. So that gives you an indication that Sean McVay does have a plan for him. He wants to use him more than he has in the past couple of years. And really, he's played well when Puka and Kupp have both been injured. I mean, he's had good games where he's had 70 yards, 5 catches. He's caught some long touchdowns. He didn't score last year, but he's shown the ability to really like make plays as a starting receiver. And with how frequently the Rams run 11 personnel and have 3 receivers on the field together, that's a big opportunity for him to really play a lot of snaps and catch a bunch of passes. They are hinting at going to more 12 personnel after drafting Terrance Ferguson, so we could see fewer 3 receiver sets, but I think all 3 of those guys are going to get opportunities.
No, that's interesting. I think, we're going to dive into here in a sec, but I think there's some intriguing guys behind all 3 of them as well. And we're going to dive into that right after this little break.
It is 32 Beat Writers season, August, when they can make you a lot of money, especially on a platform like Fast Draft. Doesn't have hundreds of best ball bro killers. So when there's an injury and you hear about it through 32 Beat Writers, you can run to the Fast Draft app and jump into a Flex 4 game. Just draft any 6 Flex players. Top 4 enter your lineup every week. Or the Rabbit, 15-round best ball. Get your quarterback wide receiver stacks, get your running back sleepers. And if you follow 32 Beat Writers, you can jump into these draft rooms and be like, oh my God, I'm avoiding this guy at all costs, and I'm gobbling up all of this other running back before the larger public is fully aware, has fully digested the ramifications of the information that 32 Beat Writers is sharing. So go get Fast Draft, type in that code 32BW. 32BW is the code. Get you a $50 deposit match on Fast Draft. Now let's go start drafting faster.
All right, let's dive into these other wide receivers. So we have Jordan Whittington, who I think I fell in love with last camp. I don't know. It was just everything seemed to be Jordan Whittington last camp. And super excited. He had, if I'm remembering correctly, a few good games. Then they go out and they get Konata Mumpfield, who was kind of quiet, and then all of a sudden just kind of burst onto the scene. Yeah. And I was like, oh my gosh, we're having Jordan Whittington 2.0 all over again, but Jordan Whittington's still on this team. It made for odd excitement, for lack of a better term. So let's talk about these 2 guys. Super intriguing, kind of what you expect from each this year. And I guess more importantly, if you think that it's any kind of possibility that these guys could move into a role that has a little bit more volume to it. So curious to hear your thoughts on them.
Yeah, Whittington, he was a really exciting player last year. He was a preseason standout and then made the 53-man roster and had a few games when Puka or Kupp were injured and stepped up before the bye. And then after the bye, they didn't really use him much, which I was surprised by. He's a similar player to Puka in that he's really physical. He can break tackles. He can run these jet sweeps. He can catch short passes and move the chains with kind of a running back type mentality in terms of just running hard with the ball in his hands. So I was surprised they didn't use him more last season. This year, he didn't play at all in the preseason, which was obviously a great sign for him. He was locked up as a player on the 53-man roster, and he's had a good camp too. And I've seen reports that he's gotten reps with the starters and taking some reps from Tutu Atwell. So I wouldn't say it's a full-on competition between those two, but if anyone's going to eat into Tutu's snaps at all, it's going to be Jordan Whittington, I think. Davante and Puka are going to play the majority of the snaps. They might get some plays off, obviously, throughout the game and throughout the season, where Whittington is actually a pretty good replacement because he's such a good blocker in the run game, and he can replace Puka with some of the things that he does. So he's someone that I would keep an eye on. I don't think he really has a ton of fantasy relevance yet, but if there's an injury or Tutu just doesn't really produce the way that the Rams are expecting him to, I would look to Whittington to be that guy who kind of steps in. And then Mumpfield, he was a surprising guy for me. 7th round pick. He started like standing out a little bit more in training camp and having these good days. And Davante Adams had a quote that stuck out to me where he said, "I've seen him kill some of our better cornerbacks with the routes that he runs," and that's coming from Davante Adams, who's one of the best running route runners in the league. So that caught my attention. And Sean McVay and Mike LaFleur have both raved about him and the job that he's done. Didn't really stand out as much as I thought in the preseason. He had a nice touchdown catch on a 2-yarder from Stetson Bennett in the second game, and then didn't play at all in the third, which was again a good sign for him. But it sounds like he's just a good route runner, doesn't have breakaway speed, but we've seen so many players over the years win with just pure route running and not really needing to run away from these guys with athleticism or make these acrobatic catches over the top. But he's a really promising receiver. And there was a video of the Rams war room during the draft where McVay flipped on the tape right before they picked him, and he was really impressed by what he could do. And he made it clear that he was the best receiver available at that time, so they took him. So another young receiver for them to build around, and we've seen them have success with Cooper Kupp and Whittington and Puka as these mid-round receivers, and obviously a 7th rounder is a little later, but still a promising young guy for them.
No, I mean, that's awesome. I think, you hit the nail on the head. The Rams are just finding guys late in the draft, and, it's probably the hardest thing to do to constantly hit. And then, obviously they become these fantasy guys that are coming late in the draft.
Yeah.
And, I'm a big Puka fan, always have been, always will be, prior to him being in the league. And just seeing him go into that offense, I was super excited. So I was like, oh, maybe we get lightning twice with Whittington. And now I'm bored 3 times, with Mumpfield. And maybe I should, calm down a little on that. But it just seems like the Rams hit on these guys in recent years. So something to keep an eye on, something to be excited about. And, you mentioned it. You have Ferguson now in the tight end room, who obviously didn't play a bunch in training camp because of the injury, but comes onto the scene, makes a pretty good statement in preseason. They bring back Higbee, seems healthy. I personally feel like he's probably locked in the tight end role. Very curious your thoughts on that in general. But you did mention them potentially playing more 2 tight end sets. So how do you kind of see Higbee, Ferguson coexisting kind of as the season starts, and then, as it progresses? Do things change, or do you think it's, remains consistent from the start of the year?
Yeah, tight end's always a tough position for rookies to transition to from college to the NFL. There's so many responsibilities, especially in an offense as complex as Sean McVay's. But it sounds like Higbee's locked in as that top tight end right now. He's a guy who can do everything, and we know how important in blocking is for in the Rams system, where they're running a lot of this 11 personnel. So your tight end has to be able to block in the run game. So I think he's kind of locked into that tight end 1 role for now. Colby Parkinson is a guy that they signed to a pretty sizable contract last year in free agency, and he filled in for Higbee throughout the regular season, but didn't do a ton. They could have cut him and saved some good money, but they decided to keep him. So he's in that room too. And then Terrance Ferguson and Davis Allen. Ferguson's the guy to watch because he's a 2nd-round pick. He's someone that they reportedly would have been comfortable taking at 26 before they traded down 20 spots. So it shows kind of how high they were on him. And he tested really well at the combine. I think he tested as like the most athletic tight end at the combine this year. So he's got a ton of upside as a tight end, especially as a receiver. He played that 1 preseason game, the finale. He played the first half against the Browns. He only got targeted 3 times. 2 of them were on like slot fades where he was lined up in the slot and he ran one-on-one against the safety. And one of them, Dresser Wynn missed him. And the second one, Ferguson made a really good play and had just stepped out of bounds. And if he didn't go down out of bounds, it would have been a 67-yard touchdown that people would have been talking about even more. So he had a really good debut, I think. McVay pointed to him being able to block a little bit better in the run game, which is something that he has to improve on. And I think as he does that, he'll get more opportunities with the offense. But with that athleticism and receiving upside, he's someone that's going to be hard to keep off the field, especially if they do go to more 12 personnel and have more 2 tight end sets where you got Higbee and Ferguson both on the field. And then Parkinson can do a little bit of that too. So interesting tight end group. I think it's the deepest group they've had since Sean McVay's been there. So a lot of depth and a lot of talent. And Higbee's the starter for now. And then I think as Ferguson kind of gets more comfortable and up to speed, he could take over a little bit more of those snaps.
No, for sure. I mean, it's crazy. I feel like Tyler Higbee should be like in his upper 30s.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it just feels like he's been in the league.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know why that is or what that is. So when they drafted Ferguson, I was like, oh, it's because Higbee's going to retire. You know what I mean? And then you look and you're like, this guy's not that old.
Yeah.
And he has been consistent for the Rams. So it is going to be really interesting. I think it's just, you get that new toy and you see the explosiveness and you're just like, and we kind of talked about it before with Hunter. It's like, there are ways these guys make you not be able to take them off the field.
Yeah. And especially when you think about the Rams too, McVay wanted Dalton Kincaid in 23. He wanted Brock Bowers last year and they finally got Ferguson this year. So he's been in search of that kind of young tight end to build around. So that's something to note too.
No, absolutely. And, that leads us into our last question here. Cam, tell us something that might not be overly obvious about this offense, but something that you feel listeners absolutely need to know about the Rams, what's going on with them, and what offensively you're seeing.
Yeah, I think the big thing right now is the offensive line. That doesn't get as much attention as the skill players like Davante and Puka and Kyren Williams, but this offensive line has a lot of potential. And Alaric Jackson was dealing with blood clots and he missed most of training camp and really is just returning to full participant in practice with these team drills next week, right before the season. So he should be ready to go at left tackle. And then you got Steve Avila. They brought back Coleman Shelton after he was with the Bears. They have Kevin Dotson at right guard, and then Rob Havenstein is one of the better right tackles in the league. So with a 37-year-old quarterback who has back injuries, keeping him upright and protected is the number one priority. And I think this offensive line legitimately has the potential to be one of the best groups in the league. Avila is a rising young player at left guard, and Shelton, I think, is going to be an upgrade at center too. So collectively, that group is going to really do a good job protecting Matthew Stafford like they did last year too. And it's mostly the same group except for Shelton. So if that group comes together and has a season that the Rams expect them to have, that running game is going to be really good. And I think Stafford's going to have a solid season too.
No, I mean, I think that's ultra important, right? For every player on the offense, the game goes by the trenches. So to hear that, I think that's inspiring across the board. All right, Cam, let's talk about what you got going on, where people can find you, how they find you, all that good stuff. If you haven't noticed, everyone, some of his info is in the bottom corner here. But Cam, tell us about what you're working on, what you got going on. It's a little bit about all that.
Yeah, going into some season preview stuff. Season, I can't believe it's already here, coming up next week. Rams play against the Texans in an opener. So trying to get some season preview stuff out this week, some bold predictions and things like that. And then we'll run into week 1 prep and previewing some Texans matchups and what the Rams have to do to beat that team and updates on Matthew Stafford throughout the week of practice next week. So that'll all be on Rams Wire. And then I'm on Twitter at Cam DaSilva.
Awesome. Well, Cam, thank you very much for joining us. For Cam, for Matt Olson, we thank you guys, and we'll see you next time on Beyond the Beat.